Hi everyone, welcome to our lesson 5-1. In this lesson, we are talking about something called margin math. And yes, business does require math sometimes. So let's imagine a scenario for a second. What if you buy a candle for $4? Okay, in your business is selling candles. So you buy a candle for $4 from a vendor, from a manufacturer, whatever, and you sell it for $10. Well, what's your margin in that case? So it's really pretty simple. You take your sales price, $10, minus your cost, that's $4. The difference, your margin, is $6. Okay, so that's your margin. Sales price minus your cost equals your margin. So, and in this particular case, in business we actually call this $6 your gross margin. Okay. So gross margin, let's give a little bit more definition of that. So gross margin, okay, that's where you take your sales revenue minus your cost of goods sold, also known as COGS, cost of goods sold, COGS, cost of goods sold. Got it? COGS. Okay. That's your gross margin. Now this is the margin. Your gross margin is before any other expenses are subtracted because you have other things that you have to pay for. Maybe you have to pay for your employee's salary. Maybe you have to pay for overhead on the factory that you have. Whatever. There's so many things that can go into that. But gross margin is essentially your sales revenue minus your COGS. So let's take it one step further because margins are usually shown as percentages. So how do we find the percentage in this case? Well, again, it's pretty easy math. We take our gross margin as $6, we divide by 10, and we get 60%. That's our margin on this particular product. Gross margin divided by your sales price, 60%. That's your margin. Now in math, this is called a quotient, but in business, we call it a gross margin or your gross margin percentage. Okay, let's look at another example. Say your business is selling hats. And so from your vendor, you buy a hat for $12 and you sell it then for $26. Well, what's your margin? Well, again, what is our formula? It is our sales price minus our cost of goods sold, COGS, remember that. Okay, so your difference of 26 minus 12, you're 14. That's your gross margin right there. Again, going into, because we express a lot of things in percentages, we take our second step. We take our gross margin, the $14, we divide it by the 26, the sales price, and we get our gross margin percentage of 53.8%. Okay, so here's the thing to remember. Margin math is really very easy. Okay, so we take our sales price, okay, we subtract our COGS, right? COGS, cost of goods sold, COGS, okay, and that gives us our margin, okay? So remember that. So help work on that. Now, then of course we express it in a percentage. So we take our margin then, and we divide it by our sales price, okay? Margin divided by sales, that equals our percentage, our gross margin percentage. And in business, we talk a lot about in percentages. What is the percentage of the particular expense? And usually it's related to our sales. So we would take that expense divided by our sales, and we get the percentage for that particular line item, for that particular expense. But in this case, we're talking simple things. We're talking margin math. So again, sales minus your COGS gives you your margin. And then to get a percentage, you take your margin, divide it by your sales price. That gives you percentage. And that is essentially our lesson on margin math, lesson 5-1.